The sun sank behind the jagged cliffs, painting the horizon in streaks of blood red and amber, while the wind whispered through the pine trees surrounding Clara Whitmore's cabin. 30 years old, with sharp hazel eyes that seemed to see every detail in the wilderness, Clara had chosen this solitude deliberately. Life in the town below had never been kind gossips, debts, and empty promises. Here, in her small log cabin at the edge of the forest, she could live on her own terms. She had learned to survive, to trust the rhythm of the land, and to find comfort in the quiet songs of nature. Tonight, however, there was an unfamiliar tension in the air. The creaking of the wooden porch beneath her boots as she stepped out to fetch water from the well felt louder than usual, echoing into the approaching twilight. Clara's instincts, honed from years of solitude, prickled. There was a presence, something not belonging. And then she saw him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of rugged charm that belonged in storybooks or wanted posters, stood at the edge of the clearing. His hat was tilted low, shadowing most of his face, and dust clung to his worn boots as if he had ridden from some distant desert. Clara's pulse quickened. She didn't recognize him, yet he carried an aura of authority that made her heart tighten, not with fear, exactly, but with wariness. "Evenin', ma'am," he called, his voice deep and smooth, carrying the faintest edge of amusement. "Hope I'm not intruding." "I live here alone," Clara replied, gripping the handle of the water bucket like a shield. "You've intruded already." Her voice was steady, but inside, a flicker of anxiety stirred. The stranger tipped his hat slightly, flashing a crooked smile. "Name's Jesse Carrington. I reckon you've got a fine place here. Might even be lonely." He paused, eyes scanning the cabin's small windows. "A lady like yourself shouldn't have to be all alone." Clara's gut tightened. There was something in the way he lingered near the door, his eyes sweeping over the cabin, that didn't feel like casual interest. She had encountered men before, traders, hunters, drifters, but Jesse's gaze carried a subtle menace hidden beneath charm. "I prefer my own company," she said cautiously. "You'd best leave before it gets dark." Jesse stepped closer, a predator with a practiced ease. "Now, Clara, there's no need to be unfriendly. I'm just a traveler, but I do wonder," he added, glancing around her cabin as if measuring its contents, "how someone as capable as you handles the hardships of the wilderness alone." Clara's hand tightened on the bucket. "I manage," she said, her voice firmer now. "And I don't need company to survive." The air between them thickened, and Jesse's smile hardened just slightly, his eyes flicking to the back of the cabin where shadows gathered under the pines. Clara noticed the glint of something metallic at his belt, a revolver. Her instinct screamed danger. Before she could move, the wind shifted, carrying a low, commanding sound, a whistle, sharp and distinct, echoing from the ridge beyond the clearing. Jesse froze mid-step, his confidence faltering for the first time. Then he saw him. A figure emerged from the tree line like a shadow brought to life. Tall, muscular, and imposing, his long black hair framed a face both stern and noble. Beads of turquoise and bone braided into his hair glinted in the fading sunlight. His eyes, dark and unyielding, fixed on Jesse with silent authority. Clara felt a surge of relief and awe. This was no ordinary man. He moved with the quiet power of the land itself, every step measured and deliberate. Jesse's smirk faltered entirely. "You've come far," the warrior said in a voice that rolled like distant thunder. "And yet you dare threaten a lady in her home." Jesse took a step back, the unease clear now. I meant no harm. Just thought to steal what isn't yours," the Apache said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He drew a longbow from his back, strung and ready, eyes never leaving Jesse. Clara's heart pounded as the tension snapped like a taut rope. Tonight, her solitude had been threatened, but it would not be broken. And somewhere deep within her, she knew, help had arrived from the most unexpected source, a protector who carried the weight of honor in every silent step he took. As Jesse stammered, trying to find a way out, Clara realized the story of her quiet life was about to change forever. The sun had vanished completely behind the jagged cliffs, leaving Clara Whitmore's cabin swathed in the cold blue shadows of night. The forest around her creaked and whispered with the wind, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Clara could still feel Jesse Carrington's eyes on her, even though the Apache warrior, tall, muscular, shirtless, and adorned with turquoise and bone jewelry, stood silently between them. "Seems you're well protected, lady," Jesse said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He shifted his weight, boots crunching against the dry earth. But protection doesn't last forever. Clara's hand brushed against the handle of the small hunting knife she kept at her belt. "Go home," she said sharply, "before things get ugly." Jesse laughed, low and menacing, though there was a flicker of unease in his gaze. "Home's far away. You, on the other hand, you're all alone here. And alone means vulnerable." He stepped closer, and Clara could now see the glint of malice beneath the charm of his crooked grin. The Apache warrior known only to Clara as Tayanita shifted his stance slightly. His eyes, dark and unwavering, locked on Jesse with a dangerous calm. The firelight from the cabin's hearth behind Clara flickered across Tayanita's toned, bare chest, the turquoise and bone beads catching glints of light. He radiated a quiet power that seemed to make the night itself pause. Clara swallowed hard, her pulse hammering. She had trusted herself, trusted the wilderness, trusted her solitude, but she had not expected betrayal at her own doorstep. And now she realized she might never be able to fend for herself alone again. "I don't want trouble," Clara said, her voice steady but tinged with fear. "Leave now, or the consequences will be on your head." Jesse's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I'll leave, when I get what I came for." He reached for the door as if the cabin itself was his right to enter. Clara instinctively stepped in front of him, heart pounding. "I said no." Tayanita moved like a shadow, silent yet forceful. In a single fluid motion, he drew a long, carved tomahawk from his belt, the metal catching the moonlight. He didn't speak, but the authority in his stance was enough. Jesse froze, realizing he had misjudged both the woman and the man guarding her. "You shouldn't have come here," Tayanita said finally, his voice deep and resonant, carrying both warning and judgment. "Leave now, or you will regret it." Jesse's bravado faltered, replaced by panic. I didn't mean any harm, really." He backed away, hands raised slightly, trying to appear harmless. Yet his every movement betrayed his intent, the small glint of a revolver at his hip telling a story Tayanita didn't need to hear. Clara's breath came fast, but she felt a strange sense of relief. She wasn't alone. Not tonight. Not while Tayanita was here. And somehow she knew that if Jesse crossed the line, he would not leave without learning the full weight of consequence. The tension held for long seconds, until Jesse finally straightened his shoulders, forced a weak laugh, and stepped backward into the shadows. "You're lucky this time," he spat, "but luck runs out." And with that, he vanished into the dark trees, his departure leaving only the echo of his boots on the hard-packed earth. Clara leaned against the cabin, knees weak, and exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Tayanita said nothing, his dark eyes scanning the perimeter, ensuring the threat had truly gone. Finally, he turned to Clara, his expression softening, though the warrior's alertness never fully left him. "You are safe for now, but you must be cautious. Men like him do not easily forget what they desire." Clara nodded, gripping the edge of the doorway. Her mind raced, trying to absorb what had just happened. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, carrying a strange mixture of relief and lingering fear. She had survived tonight, but she also understood that the world beyond her cabin was dangerous, full of men who underestimated women like her and overestimated themselves. For the first time in years, Clara felt a connection she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long while: trust. Not blind trust, but the kind that comes from knowing someone possesses strength, honor, and courage beyond measure. Tayanita had not only saved her life, he had reminded her that some bonds, even forged in the wilderness, were worth holding on to. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the clearing, the forest whispered its secrets. Tomorrow, Clara knew, the world might feel different. But tonight she was alive, and she would not forget it. The night had settled over the valley like a thick, heavy blanket, but Clara Whitmore's mind refused to rest. Even as the cool wind whispered through the pines outside her cabin, she could still feel the echo of Jesse Carrington's intent, a chill reminder that danger had nearly breached her sanctuary. Her hands trembled slightly as she lit the oil lamp, its warm glow filling the small cabin with a fragile sense of safety. Tayanita, the muscular, shirtless Apache warrior adorned with tribal jewelry, remained near the edge of the clearing, silent as a shadow. His presence was both comforting and formidable, a living barrier against any threat. Clara found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the way the moonlight danced off the turquoise beads in his hair and the strength in his posture. He didn't speak unless necessary, but every movement he made exuded protection and quiet authority. "Do you think he'll come back?" Clara asked softly, almost afraid to break the stillness. Tayanita's dark eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "Men like him are persistent, but they are not invincible. You must be vigilant, yet not paralyzed by fear." Clara nodded, taking a deep breath to calm herself. She had always relied on her own skills hunting, tracking, even handling a rifle, but tonight had proven that some threats required more than skill alone. Tayanita's intervention had been decisive, yet it left her wondering how many men in the valley had eyes on her cabin, and how many more would be tempted by greed or malice. The next morning, Clara rode into the nearby town cautiously. She wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, hoping to avoid attention, though her presence did not go unnoticed. Whispers followed her through the dusty streets. The townsfolk had heard rumors of a confrontation at her cabin involving a stranger and a powerful Apache warrior. Curiosity and fear mingled in their eyes. Clara approached the general store, purchasing supplies with careful precision, but she sensed the subtle shifts in the townspeople's demeanor. They lingered, casting furtive glances at her, murmuring amongst themselves. She understood. News traveled fast in small towns, and tales of danger and heroism carried weight beyond simple facts. Meanwhile, Jesse Carrington was not idle. He prowled the outskirts of the town, frustrated and furious. The encounter at Clara's cabin had shaken his pride, and he vowed to find a way to claim what he had initially sought, whether through charm, deceit, or force. But in his planning, he underestimated the silent network of respect and fear that Tayanita commanded. By midday, the town itself began to shift. Unseen at first, then undeniable. The people were watching, waiting, as if expecting something extraordinary to occur. And when Tayanita appeared on the outskirts, standing tall and proud beneath the scorching sun, the effect was immediate. His presence carried the weight of legend. Muscles glistening with sweat, turquoise and bone jewelry catching the sunlight, he exuded both strength and nobility. Townsfolk stopped their errands, conversations halting mid-sentence, as the warrior surveyed the streets with eyes that missed nothing. Clara watched from a distance, heart swelling with gratitude and awe. Tayanita didn't need to speak for them to understand the message. Protection, honor, and justice were present in the valley, embodied in this man who had come for her when she needed it most. Even the sheriff, a man usually unshakable, nodded respectfully, recognizing that this was no ordinary protector. By nightfall, word had spread throughout the town. The story of Clara Whitmore's narrow escape and the silent, commanding Apache warrior who had saved her became legend almost instantly. Merchants, farmers, and townsfolk of every kind offered tribute, not as a demand, but as acknowledgment of respect. Turquoise beads, handcrafted leather goods, fresh game from hunters, and other tokens of gratitude were left near the edge of Clara's cabin. A silent testament to the impact of courage and honor in a land often defined by lawlessness. Sitting by her hearth that night, Clara felt a strange mix of relief, awe, and humility. She understood that the valley had changed not just because of Jesse's attempted betrayal, but because of the unwavering presence of someone who embodied the principle she had long admired from afar: strength, courage, and honor. And she also knew that the story was far from over. Jesse Carrington still lurked in the shadows, and the bond she shared with Tayanita, forged in peril and respect, would be tested in ways neither of them yet imagined. But tonight, the forest whispered softly, carrying the promise that some dangers could be met and overcome with the right kind of strength. The first light of dawn crept across the valley, painting the cliffs in soft gold and stretching long shadows across Clara Whitmore's cabin. The night had passed without incident, but Clara's heart remained tense. She knew that Jesse Carrington's pride and malice would not let him retreat quietly. Some men, once humiliated, became more dangerous than ever. Clara moved quietly around her cabin, tending to chores while her mind wandered to Tayanita. The muscular, shirtless Apache warrior had stayed the night nearby, silently keeping watch. His long black hair, braided with turquoise and bone beads, glimmered in the morning sun, his presence both reassuring and powerful. She couldn't explain the comfort she felt in knowing he was there, though she also sensed the weight of vigilance he carried. Suddenly, a faint rustle came from the ridge behind the cabin. Clara froze, her hands tightening on the wooden broom she held. The wind carried a familiar, threatening energy. Jesse had returned. She turned, just in time to see his shadow emerging between the trees, his revolver glinting in the morning light. "You thought you could hide," Jesse muttered, his voice low, almost venomous. "Thought I'd forget you and your friend?" He sneered at the distant figure of Tayanita, stepping closer with measured confidence. "I always get what I want." Clara's pulse quickened. She knew she could not face him alone. She backed toward the cabin, keeping her eyes on the path Jesse was taking, hoping the Apache warrior would act before words could turn into violence. Tayanita appeared like a living shadow, descending the slope silently. His bare chest reflected the sun's light, muscles tense and ready. He moved with the precision of a predator, yet every step carried a calm authority. His eyes never left Jesse, a dark storm of warning and judgment. "Enough, Jesse." Tayanita's voice rolled across the clearing, low and commanding. "Leave this place or face the consequences of your arrogance." Jesse laughed, though it lacked its former bravado. "Consequences? I think you underestimate me, friend. A lady, alone, and a stranger who thinks he can stop me? I'll take what I want, and no one can stop me." Tayanita's eyes narrowed. Without a word, he raised a hand, signaling with precision. In a blur of motion, he advanced, tomahawk in hand, every movement calculated and unstoppable. Jesse's revolver shook slightly in his grip, doubt creeping in for the first time. Clara's breath caught as the confrontation unfolded. She had seen Tayanita in the moonlight before, silent and vigilant, but now she witnessed his full presence in daylight, a force of nature, unwavering, indomitable. Jesse's confidence faltered, and the cruel twist of fate seemed to close in around him. The encounter was brief but decisive. Jesse stumbled backward, tripping over the roots and rocks of the forest floor. Tayanita didn't strike without reason, but his towering figure and lethal posture conveyed enough threat to make Jesse's retreat instinctive. With a final threatening glare, Jesse scrambled into the shadows, disappearing once more into the wilderness. Clara's knees went weak, and she sank to the wooden porch, relief flooding her system. Tayanita approached, silent as ever, though the corners of his mouth hinted at the faintest trace of reassurance. "You're safe," he said softly, his voice steady, carrying warmth beneath its commanding tone. "For now, but you must remain vigilant. Men like him rarely learn from defeat, they only plot." Clara nodded, struggling to find words. "Thank you. For everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." Tayanita's eyes softened, though only slightly. "Survival is more than skill. It is knowing who to trust and when to act. You must remember that." He turned his gaze back to the forest, as if daring Jesse or any other threat to return. By midday, the town below had begun to stir with news of the morning's events. Clara watched from a distance as townsfolk began leaving small tokens at the edge of the cabins, clearing fresh game, woven blankets, handcrafted beads. It was a silent acknowledgement of the warrior's strength and the danger that had been thwarted. Clara realized for the first time that her quiet life in the wilderness was no longer entirely her own. The world around her, once distant and predictable, had grown larger, filled with both peril and allies. And in the center of that new world stood Tayanita, a protector whose presence would forever alter the rhythm of her life. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the cliffs, Clara sat on the porch, watching the horizon. She knew Jesse Carrington had not yet given up, but she also knew that, with Tayanita by her side, she had a strength she had never imagined. The valley was changing, and so was she. And for the first time, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years: hope. The sun had climbed high above the valley, casting a golden glow over the small town nestled at the base of the cliffs. Clara Whitmore moved cautiously through the streets, her wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from curious eyes. She had come to accept that news traveled fast in these parts, and that the story of her narrow escape and the mysterious Apache warrior was no exception. Whispers followed her everywhere. Merchants paused mid-task. Children peeked from behind barrels, and even the sheriff gave her a respectful nod. Meanwhile, Jesse Carrington lurked in the outskirts of the town, his anger simmering. Humiliation still burned in his chest from his failed attempt to deceive Clara at her cabin. Each step he took through the dusty streets carried tension as he surveyed the townsfolk, plotting his next move. Yet, no one dared challenge him openly, not with Tayanita in the valley. The Apache warrior's presence had grown more palpable by the hour. Muscular and shirtless, his long black hair braided with turquoise and bone beads, Tayanita moved with the silent authority of someone who owned the land, though he never spoke unless necessary. Townsfolk had begun leaving small tokens of gratitude at the edge of Clara's cabin: handcrafted goods, fresh game, blankets, and carved trinkets. The gifts were humble, but they carried the weight of respect and recognition. Clara approached the cabin as a small crowd gathered, whispering about Tayanita and the danger he had prevented. She felt a mixture of pride and unease. While the gifts symbolized admiration, they also reminded her that the story of her life had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer a solitary woman in the wilderness. She was the woman protected by a legendary warrior. A young boy approached, holding a bundle of wild herbs. "For him," the child said shyly, pointing toward Tayanita, who stood nearby, observing the gathering with calm, dark eyes. Clara accepted the herbs, nodding in thanks, and placed them among the other tokens. Tayanita's gaze never left the forest beyond the town. He sensed the tension in the air, the whispers of Jesse's plotting, the anticipation of townsfolk eager to witness justice and strength firsthand. His bare chest and taut muscles glistened in the sunlight, and his presence alone commanded respect. Even the most skeptical townspeople instinctively stepped back, knowing they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. By midday, a small procession had formed. The townsfolk, from farmers to blacksmiths, carried their offerings baskets of fruit, woven blankets, carved jewelry, and jars of preserves. They laid them carefully at the edge of Clara's clearing, a collective tribute to Tayanita's courage and vigilance. The warrior accepted their gestures with silent dignity, bowing slightly, his piercing eyes scanning the crowd and the surrounding forest. Clara stood to the side, her heart swelling with gratitude and awe. She had never imagined that the events of a few nights could unite a town in such a way, nor that one man's strength could inspire such respect. Yet she also sensed the delicate balance that held the peace together. Jesse Carrington still lurked, a shadow waiting to strike. As the sun began its descent, casting long, warm shadows over the valley, Clara and Tayanita walked to the edge of the clearing. "They honor you," Clara said softly, glancing at the gathered tokens. "But I fear what Jesse might do next." Tayanita's dark eyes met hers. "Fear is natural," he said calmly, "but it must not dictate your actions. You must remain vigilant, but also strong. Men like Jesse test the weak. They avoid the strong. And strength is not just in muscle, it is in honor, courage, and unity." Clara nodded, absorbing his words. She felt a profound shift within herself, a new understanding of trust, courage, and the complex dance between danger and protection. The valley, once a quiet refuge, had become a place of lessons, alliances, and the promise of unexpected change. As night fell, the tokens of gratitude shimmered in the last light, creating a mosaic of respect and admiration around Clara's cabin. Tayanita stood at the edge of the clearing, vigilant as ever, his muscles outlined by the soft glow of lanterns and moonlight. The town had witnessed true bravery and had offered its tribute, but Clara knew the real story was not over. Jesse Carrington's shadow still lingered, and the bond between her and Tayanita would soon be tested in ways neither of them yet imagined. For now, though, the valley rested in quiet anticipation, honoring the warrior who had saved one woman, and doing so reminded them all of the power of courage, honor, and vigilance. The valley was bathed in the silver glow of the moon, shadows stretching long and jagged across Clara Whitmore's cabin. She stood on the porch, her hazel eyes scanning the forest beyond. Even after the town had honored Tayanita with tribute, a part of her knew that danger still lingered in the darkness. Jesse Carrington had not forgotten his humiliation, and men like him were relentless when driven by greed and pride. Tayanita, the muscular, shirtless Apache warrior with long black hair braided with turquoise and bone beads, leaned silently against the cabin's edge. His dark eyes were like coals in the moonlight, calm, focused, and unwavering. His bare chest gleamed in the pale light, muscles taut and ready. Clara felt a shiver of both fear and reassurance. In his presence, she knew she was protected by someone unmatched in skill and honor. A sudden rustle in the trees snapped her attention toward the ridge. Jesse emerged from the darkness, face twisted with malice, revolver glinting under the moon. "Thought you could humiliate me and walk away?" He spat, his voice laced with venom. "I always get what I want." Clara's heart pounded. She backed toward the cabin, her hand brushing against the knife at her belt. Tayanita stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the intruder. The wind seemed to hold its breath, carrying only the tense hum of anticipation. "Leave now, Jesse," Tayanita commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "You have been warned. Step closer, and you will not leave this valley." Jesse laughed, though it carried none of its earlier confidence. "And you think you can stop me?" He raised his revolver, aiming at Tayanita, though doubt flickered in his eyes. The warrior's stance, solid and unwavering, was more threatening than any weapon could be. In a flash, Tayanita moved like lightning. His bare arms extended, tomahawk in hand, muscles coiled with lethal precision. Jesse's finger trembled on the trigger, hesitation overtaking arrogance. The distance closed in seconds. Tayanita's presence alone was enough to unnerve the cowboy, a living storm of power and resolve. Clara watched, breath held, as the standoff unfolded. Tayanita's every movement spoke of mastery and control. He didn't strike without reason. He let the weight of his presence, the inevitability of consequence, speak first. Jesse faltered, the revolver shaking in his grasp, realizing he had underestimated the warrior and the woman he had thought helpless. With a final, commanding step, Tayanita disarmed Jesse in a swift motion, sending the revolver skittering across the dirt. Jesse stumbled back, tripping over roots and rocks, his eyes wide with terror. Clara felt a rush of relief, yet she knew this confrontation was more than a mere physical struggle. It was the triumph of honor over greed, of courage over malice. Tayanita's voice cut through the silence like thunder. "Leave this place, Jesse. Never return. Your threat ends tonight." Jesse scrambled to his feet, beaten and humiliated. He glared at Clara one last time, but the fire in her eyes, coupled with Tayanita's unyielding presence, broke his resolve. Without another word, he disappeared into the shadows of the forest, leaving only the sound of rustling leaves in his wake. Clara sank onto the porch steps, chest heaving, her hands trembling. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Tayanita's dark eyes softened slightly. "No thanks are needed. Protection is my duty. But remember this, Clara, strength is not just in the arms, nor bravery only in battle. It is in the choices you make and the courage to stand for what is right." By dawn, the town had begun to hear whispers of the night's final events. Tayanita's heroism was now legend, and the townsfolk felt a renewed respect for both him and Clara. Offerings of tribute continued, each item a silent acknowledgment of courage and honor. The valley itself seemed to settle, as though recognizing that balance had been restored. Clara felt a profound shift within herself. Her solitude, once absolute, had been tempered by the presence of someone she could trust completely. The danger had passed, yet the lessons remained: vigilance, courage, and the value of allies who embody honor. And as the first rays of sunlight broke over the cliffs, Clara understood that her life had changed forever. The valley was no longer just a place of quiet isolation. It was a land where courage and justice could prevail, where honor could protect the innocent, and where the bond between her and Tayanita would remain unbroken. The shadow of Jesse Carrington may have lingered, but the strength of the warrior and the spirit of Clara Whitmore now held sway over the valley. Together, they had ensured that justice, respect, and honor would endure. The morning sun bathed the valley in warm gold, scattering shadows across the dusty streets and the pine-fringed clearing near Clara Whitmore's cabin. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine, fresh earth, and the faint smoke from chimney fires in the town below. After the events of the past nights, the valley had grown quieter, almost reverent, as if it itself acknowledged the courage and honor that had been demonstrated. Clara stepped out onto the porch, her hazel eyes sweeping over the tokens of tribute the townsfolk had left. Baskets of fruit, woven blankets, carved jewelry, and small bundles of fresh game formed a mosaic of respect and gratitude. Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief, pride, and humility. The people had recognized not just Tayanita's heroism, but also her own courage in facing danger and standing her ground. Tayanita, the muscular, shirtless Apache warrior with long black hair braided with turquoise and bone beads, stood tall at the edge of the clearing. His bare chest gleamed in the morning sun, every muscle taut and defined, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with calm vigilance. He radiated quiet authority, the kind that commanded both respect and admiration without a single word. The townsfolk instinctively stepped back, leaving space around him, their eyes full of awe. Clara approached him, her steps deliberate yet hesitant. "They've left so much." "For you," she said softly. "I don't know if you expected this." Tayanita's eyes softened ever so slightly. "Tribute is not given for expectation," he said. "It is given for deeds, for honor, for protection. And today they honor the balance that has been restored." A murmur ran through the crowd as townsfolk gathered at a respectful distance. Their curiosity was mingled with awe. They had seen a woman defend her home, a warrior defend her life, and a coward's threat rendered powerless. Now they came to show their appreciation, their respect, and their loyalty. One by one, men and women stepped forward to place offerings at the edge of the clearing. A blacksmith left a finely crafted knife. A farmer placed a basket of fresh eggs and vegetables. Children shyly offered small hand-carved wooden figures. Each item was a silent acknowledgement of courage, honor, and the protection Tayanita had provided. Clara watched in quiet admiration. She realized that the valley had shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her solitude, once the defining feature of her life, now shared space with loyalty, respect, and the unspoken promise of protection. And though she had initially relied on Tayanita's strength, she now understood that his actions had inspired courage not only in her, but also in the entire community. Tayanita accepted each token with silent dignity, bowing slightly but never lowering his gaze. His presence alone communicated the message. Deeds, not words, define a person. Even the sheriff, a man usually bound by law rather than instinct, approached and laid down a small leather pouch as a token of acknowledgement. It was the first time Clara had seen the sheriff step into such reverent respect, and it moved her. The morning passed slowly, the townsfolk lingering for a final glimpse before returning to their daily routines. Clara and Tayanita stood together at the edge of the clearing, watching the valley stretch out before them. A sense of calm had settled over the land. Jesse Carrington, defeated and humiliated, had vanished beyond the cliffs, never to return, not without reckoning, and now, with the town united in respect, he would find no easy prey. Clara felt a quiet strength in herself she hadn't realized was possible. "I never thought my life would change like this," she said. "I thought solitude was all I needed." Tayanita's dark eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "Solitude teaches resilience," he said. "But courage, loyalty, and honor, these are what shape the world around you. You have learned that, and now you know its value." As the sun rose higher, casting the valley in bright light, Clara and Tayanita stood silently together, their bond forged in trust, danger, and honor. The townsfolk's tribute, laid respectfully at the clearing's edge, reflected not only gratitude but the acknowledgement of a warrior's code that had protected an innocent and restored balance to a restless land. And for the first time in years, Clara felt that her life, once defined by isolation and caution, now contained hope, trust, and a new sense of belonging. Tayanita's presence, the town's respect, and the lessons learned through confrontation had transformed the valley and her own spirit forever. The shadows of danger had receded, honor had been upheld, and the valley, vibrant and alive, bore witness to the courage of a woman and the strength of a warrior. Together they had endured, and together they had ensured that justice, respect, and courage would remain in the land.